Welcome to issue 45 of the Steve and Cimino Says Boom Show.
Bomb!
Hey everyone, welcome to Pop XP. And before the show starts, make sure to click that subscribe button and click the bell to get notifications when we go live and we upload awesome new content. And don't forget, if you can, make sure to share our stream on all your social media outlets. We appreciate it, and thanks for helping us grow the Pop XP channel.
We always keep the hits coming. We always keep them coming. Fanboy talk, superstar guests, all good stuff. How you doing today, Steve? How you feeling today on issue number 45?
I am so hopped up right now on this tea. I got so much caffeine in my body, and I've got like an empty stomach. So if I explode, it's just over caffeinated. Okay.
You getting the jitters?
No, it's only.
Look, we can't.
It's not that strong. It's this. It's called Pure Leaf, no sugar, unsweetened tea. This is a John Cimino drink, right?
Not a sponsor. Not a sponsor.
I'm on.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. But you know, if you want to throw me some balls, okay.
So now, tell us what we got to do. Keep us on the even keel, please.
All right. Everyone knows the rules. They know the house rules. Make sure to look below, click that subscribe button, and smash that bell to get notifications when we go live and we upload some awesome new content. And make sure to like and share the videos as well on all your social media platforms. Gentlemen, I'm excited. We got a great show tonight.
Great show. Great guest. We always get great guests. Now, the guest we got today is very special because, first off, he's one of us. I call him a Roy Thomas, a guy that was just such a fan at the beginnings and just made it into the business and made a life through these superheroes and lived, got to play with them and went on to do other big things, but yet still celebrates them and still talks about them like we do. And that's the best thing. And this is the stuff we always highlight here on the podcast is the love of. I love listening to the legends, the stories, but behind the scenes, like their passion for it. And I love when people have never lose that passion. And that's one of the greatest things. So Steve, what do you got to say about today's guest?
As soon as I heard that we were having today's guest on, I got very excited because he was there during the maelstrom of where Marvel began to fall apart in some aspects for us older readers. And we saw it. And Marvel was going through this weird transitional period where other people, bigwigs, had taken over control, and the established order that had been in place ever since Stan and Roy was washed away. And our guest today was there, right there on the ground floor, seeing this. So we're going to get into the weeds today and really delve into some juicy stuff. I think so.
Yes. Steve always loves to get into the weeds. And when Steve gets giddy, I get giddy. And then Neil gets trigger happy with those fingers. It's great. But I just want to say how much I like this guy, because I first met him when me, Roy, and Carla Conway, we went to the Marvel Endgame premiere in New York City. And we were all having a blast there, and this guy comes and he walks over to up the aisle and he says hello. He was very respectful, very happy to see Roy. You could see his eyes light up, and I'm like, I know this guy. And then I got his name, and then I'm like, oh, I read some of your stuff, and it just showed me who he was before I even knew him. So seeing that, I knew he was a like just a real fan. And then talking with him online, sometimes debating and going over some stuff, it's just great. And that's what I love. And when we can get these creators here and to talk and have some fun. So without further ado now, what do we think? We got to bring in a Hulk fan, a super scribe. The guy has written so much. He even threw me in a Time magazine, so I got to love him for that.
Maybe even a fellow one of these.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow. Niall, look at you.
It's magic. These are visual effects right here. Is that really my hand?
So I gotta say, even me and Nixon have been mentioned in Time magazine. I love it. I can't say it. So without further ado now, let's bring him out, Mr. Glenn Greenberg.
Welcome to the show.
Hello there. Oh, okay. There we go.
Thank you, Glenn, for coming on. It's a pleasure to have you. And once again, like I was saying earlier, that you are a fan of this industry that we all are obsessed of, and why it's the biggest thing in the world. My God, tell us, Glenn. First off, tell us your beginnings in this field. Like even before you got into the writings, like what did little Glenn Greenberg do when he was running around in his tough-skin jeans that were all ripped up?
Well, I mean, for me, it all started with the Batman TV show, which was in reruns at the time in New York. It was on every day after school on Channel 11, and I must have been around 4 or 5 years old. And it just captured my imagination like nothing else. I absolutely loved that show. And then my brother, who was considerably older than me, went off to college. And I found in his closet the Batman comic books that he'd left behind. And I was like, there's comic books too? So so I dove right into Batman. And that's where it really all began. And then not too long after that, I guess I was rummaging through his collection in that closet, and I stumbled upon the Incredible Hulk. And this was during I believe it was during the Len Wein, Herb Trimpe era. And again, captured my imagination. Not long after that, the Hulk became a TV series. And I was totally jazzed for it. I was young enough that when the Hulk first showed up, I was actually kind of scared of him. That's how young I was at the time. Yeah. But I was also very confused because the Hulk was a guy named Bruce Banner. And throughout the whole first 45 minutes of that TV movie, there's this guy that they keep calling David, and I'm waiting for Bruce to show up. So it wasn't until Bill Bixby becomes Lou Ferrigno that I realized, oh, they changed his name for some reason. But I was by that point I was a diehard Hulk fan, and I was so captivated with the whole process of comic books and how they're created. And I didn't know how they were created, but I've decided how they were created, and I started creating my own Hulk comic books. And I must have been around 8 years old, and I would sit there with loose leaf paper and just write and draw my own Hulk comic books. And I did that for about 4 years, believe it or not. And if you look at the first ones that I did versus the ones that I did towards the end when I was 12, you do see a distinct growth and evolution in how I drew and how I wrote. The writing got a little more sophisticated. So I consider it like very early on the job training that prepared me for my later career. But yeah, I was doing it all the time, coming up with different stories. Like, what would I like to see the Hulk do? Who would I like to see the Hulk fight? Didn't matter if they were over at DC, but if I wanted the Hulk to fight Superman, he was going to fight Superman. If I wanted Batman to show up, Batman would, stuff like that. But that's where it really all began. And of course, as I got a little bit older and I was getting an allowance, I was able to expand my horizons a little bit. So I grew beyond Batman and the Hulk, but I always stuck with them. But I added to it, and before you knew it, there was Spider-Man. There were the Star Wars comics, the new Teen Titans, Star Trek comics. And it just went on and on and on from there. But it started, I would say, it really started when I was 4, and it kicked into overdrive by the time I was like 8.
Glenn, I gotta just tell you, we got a lot of parallels here, and it gets me giddy
Yes,
when
you
I
do.
see.
Did we just become best friends?
Okay, I got into the Hulk too when the Lou Ferrigno stuff is, and the thing is, my parents wouldn't let me watch it because they thought it would be scary. So my brother could watch it because he was older than me, but I hid and I looked and I watched that whole pilot episode, and I became obsessed. And what's funny is you getting into it the same time I did, because the Hulk exploded at that time. He was everywhere, all on merchandise. You know, 77, 78, 79, 80. That's when Marvel started pumping out the merchandise, and the Hulk was everywhere. So you were inundated with all that stuff. But you want to know the other thing we did was I started doing the comics too. And this is how obsessed I was. I would take 3 pieces of paper and I would do a Hulk comic, you know, and John Cimino Productions, but he would always fight somebody new each one. But Glenn, I put one out every week without fail, and I went up to 475. How many years is that? And my mom threw them all away.
Oh no!
Oh no!
I did 60 issues over 4 years, and I ended on a cliffhanger where the Hulk was thrust back in time, and in the next issue he was going to meet Conan the Barbarian. Because at that point I was heavily into Conan the Barbarian at that point, and that's where I finished. I never did that story.
In my last issues, I remember, I think Wolverine appeared as a guest star, and like it started to become the Hulk and Wolverine and stuff. But what's so funny is I love that you were so obsessed with that too, because like, and you would always try to put them out. That's phenomenal. Now, let me just ask you. So, okay, so you're starting to do this now. When you got a hint that you're going to get into that field, or like or that it was possible to get into the comics field?
I had no inkling. I had no thought about doing it as a living. When I went to college, I went with the intention of going to law school after that. And what happened was I had gotten to my senior year of college, and I had taken the LSAT 3 times. By that point, every time I took the LSAT, I had like, you know, a panic attack. It was just like, you know, I literally, the last time I think I got sick in the middle of taking the test. I'm like, what am I doing to myself? I don't even want to be a lawyer. And what happened was my senior year, I was invited to be part of this science fiction convention. I went to State University of New York at Stony Brook, and every year they hosted a convention, a science fiction science fact comic book convention called Icon. And by word of mouth, somebody had heard about me and my interests and all that kind of stuff, and they came to me and invited me to be part of the steering committee, the planning committee, and they asked me if I would be in charge of the comics, inviting comic book guests, putting together the comic book programming, and so forth. And I said sure. And in the midst of all of that, I started giving it serious thought. And I remembered that back when I was 12 years old, it's a long, complicated story. So I'll just give you the Reader's Digest version. Through a friend of a friend, I had met an executive editor at Marvel when I was 12 named Bob Budiansky. He was an executive editor at Marvel at the time. And he actually gave me and my older sister a tour of the Marvel offices around early 1983.
Wow.
So I got to meet some of the names that, you know, at the time, you know, were known, but now are considered like legends. I met Ann Nocenti. I think I met Joe Duffy. I saw Jim Shooter in his office, but I didn't get a chance to talk to him.
Yeah.
But anyway, after that that visit to the Marvel offices, I stayed in touch with Bob every now and then. I would give him updates on what I was doing in school. I would draw him pictures and send them to him. He was best known at the time for having drawn Ghost Rider, the original Ghost Rider series.
Yeah.
So I drew him like a Ghost Rider birthday card, wishing him a happy birthday. Which he still saved. He scanned it for me recently and sent me the scan to see I held on to it. Anyway, to cut to the chase, when I was part of this Icon convention and I was looking for guests to invite, he was one of the people that I invited, and he couldn't make it. But during the midst of all this, the seed started to get planted. Like, maybe, I mean, since I don't want to go to law, what do you really want to do, Glenn? What is it you really want to do? And it came down to two things. I either wanted to go to film school because I had just seen the movie The Freshman with Matthew Broderick and Marlon Brando. And I said, my God, I think I would love going to film school. So it was either film school or getting into comics. And so I had invited Bob Budiansky to Icon. He couldn't make it. But I called him back and I said, you know, I'm interested in getting into comic books, doing it professionally. Could you give me some advice? And we talked a little bit. And what had happened was towards the end of my senior year, Icon, I guess, had come and gone. It was a big success. Stan Lee was my guest of honor, and I had made some connections at Marvel and DC. Bob had actually reached out to me and said, look, I'm hiring an assistant editor. I'd love for you to come in for an interview, but I need to hire somebody like right away. And I still had like a month or two left of college to go. And I said, I'm really interested, but if I dropped out of college now, my mom would kill me. So, so I had to pass on that first opportunity.
Wow.
But Bob, as you know, as we continue talking, you'll see that Bob turned out to be one of the major figures in my career.
Wow. Go ahead, Steve. Wow.
Well, I find it fascinating how that Hulk TV series has so much power for our generation.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't reading comics when that TV series came out. You know, we were very poor. Buying a comic wasn't going to happen. So I didn't have any problems. I didn't know that it wasn't David Banner or whatever it was. But I also watched the we got it a year after you guys, you lucky Yanks. But we got it a year later, and I saw it, and I was just like, again, I was like, I mean, I didn't know that they'd messed around with the origin and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm watching this thinking that this is the way things are.
Yeah.
And there was that one particular scene where, you know, Bill Bixby is trying to lift the car, and he's not doing it, and it affected me so much.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh my God, he can't lift the car. And, you know, and his wife's in the car, and he's too small, too skinny. And I was at the time the smallest little skinny guy you've ever known in your life. You blow, whoof, and I would float away like a butterfly. And I was like, oh, so I was inside that.
Mm.
But, you know, obviously a couple of years later, I picked up some comics, and I was like, oh, a new atomic bomb explosion. Okay. Okay. And wow, look how strong he is in the comics. God's sakes. If only, you know, because, you know, in the TV series, it was always agonizingly annoying that he was struggling lifting a car. And in the comics, you know,
It's on his finger.
So again, our generation, and anyone I meet from our generation who's into superheroes, it's a defining moment. So it's fascinating there that we get that.
Well, it's not just because, and it's not just because that's all we had at the time. It's also because that especially the pilot movie was just so good. And even though it deviates significantly from the comic book lore, I still rank it as one of the best Hulk stories ever done.
Ever.
Oh,
Ever.
yes. I believe you me. Yeah. Even to this day.
Yeah.
When the female scientist is dead and she's in his arms, I'm dying. I'm like,
oh yeah, that was
like, oh.
and you can watch it today, and it's still good. It's
yeah.
not,
Yes.
and just a
And
little
that's,
side.
that shows you that the director, I know he gets a lot of flack, but the director said, we're not going to do a comic booky type thing that will, because when you watch old Wonder Woman episodes, right, it's like, oh, okay, buddy.
Yeah.
But when you watch that original thing, it's like, okay, this is real science, and there is a side effect, whatever it is. And I think that, the original director's point of view on certain things actually proved correct, because you're right. You put it on TV right now, people can take it like that.
Yeah.
But Glenn, I'm sort of, I always love to, dive into that weeds. So who is it that you worked with first? I mean, you said that there was a position for an assistant editor. I mean, you're obviously very young. And if someone said to me that I was going to have to edit something, I would be like, really? So someone else is going to be like relying on me, and I'm going to be like, well, I think this should be done. And then some guy's screaming on the phone like, who in the bloody hell are you? I mean, what? How did this happen?
Well, again, you fast forward, so that would have been spring of 91 when Bob and I first spoke. And then what happened was I graduated from college, and I got a job in book publishing. So that was my first job out of college, was in mainstream just book publishing. I did that for exactly 1 year, July 1st, 91 to July 1st, 1992. And what happened was during that year, I just worked the connections that I'd made in the comic book industry through that convention that I helped organize. So I just stayed in touch with all of the comic book people that I now knew. And what happened was I picked up some freelance work, just minor stuff like handling letters pages for some Marvel comics. And I was at the Marvel offices dropping off my freelance work, and Bob Budiansky sees me in the hall, and he points to me and goes, I want to talk to you. Ooh. And we went to his office, and he said, look, the assistant editor that I ended up hiring didn't work out. I'd like you to interview for the position. This is like a year or so after the first time that we'd spoken. So I did interview, and I did get the job. And Bob was in charge of special projects. So when I first got to Marvel, I wasn't working on comic books. I was working on special projects. So I was working on like the trading cards, and I was working on like these one-off types of things. And really, because I was an assistant editor, I really was the low man on the totem pole. And I was basically doing a lot of the legwork and the hands-on, the technical type of stuff. I wasn't at first dealing with, the big names. But what happened was I guess I had proven myself, and as things went along, and as the trading cards were really taking off, I mean, that was like that industry was like exploding.
Yes.
And so I would contribute ideas, like, if we're going to do like I would like come up with ideas for themes that we could do, like to link cards together. I would come up with suggestions on who to approach, and that's how I first got to work with George Perez or Bob Larkin, Joe Jusko, it's Mark Bagley. That's how I got started working with the artists. I would call them up and say, would you be interested in doing this? Here's the schedule. When they were late, I'd call them up and say, can you turn that stuff in? So that was really how it all got started. By the time my direct boss, my original boss was Bob Budiansky, and then I got moved to work directly with Tom Brevoort, who is still at Marvel today. And Tom and I were a really tight-knit team, and we really worked closely with Bob Budiansky. And by the time we started taking on books, I felt very comfortable making notes on a script or making notes on a plot, because I had been writing, not professionally, but writing and honing my craft since I was 8 years old. So I had a sense of story, and I had a sense of how characters talk and all of that. And so for me, it was very natural, as long as I wasn't a jerk about it, and I will say that when you're fresh out of college and, you think the world is your oyster, you don't mean to come off as a jerk, but you can. And I probably did I probably did in some ways. I've learned a lot since then. I've learned a lot about diplomacy, for one thing. I certainly always tried to be very constructive, and always tried to be very positive about if I had ideas that I thought would improve a plot or a script. Other times when you're on the deadline crunch, and you just wish that what you got in was ready to go, you get a little frustrated, and sometimes you probably are not as diplomatic as you want to be. But for the most part, to answer your question in a very long-winded way, I didn't feel intimidated about editing people's work and making suggestions, because I felt like, well, that's my job. That's what I'm there for. Writers need editors, and if I could help something be better, then damn it, I will.
It must have been really exciting, but loving this stuff your whole life, and then you walk through those doors, and it's like, I'm going to be working here and playing with this stuff. So you weren't hands-on right away. You're still in the vicinity and almost touching the golden chalice. It's just and just being around that how did that feel though? You walking in oh my God, I'm actually here.
My parents because I was still living with my parents when I started there, and I overheard my mom talking to one of her friends on the phone saying, "Oh my gosh, it's like he's a completely new person. He comes home with a spring in his step, and he's a smile on his face." It really was. It was a thrill. It was really exciting, and it was very fulfilling, both creatively and emotionally and spiritually. It really was a terrific time. It was a heady experience because, and I never took it for granted, because I know how hard it is to get it. I knew how hard it is back then to get into the industry, and I felt extremely fortunate. And I never took it for granted that, I belong here and I deserve to. I never thought that. I was like, wow, cherish these times.
So when did you start writing your first issues? When did you start getting those assignments?
I didn't feel, because the thing was, at Marvel at the time, because staffers were allowed to do freelance as well, and everybody who was on staff more or less, got into so they can get freelance and then eventually move off and do freelance full time. I didn't want to do freelance full time. I loved being an editor, but I also felt like I needed to be there for a while before I started pitching, because I didn't want anyone to think that I was just there to nab some writing assignments. So I waited about 6 to 8 months. And the first thing I pitched was an Iron Man story for Marvel Comics Presents, because that was it was a bi-weekly. It came out every 2 weeks, a bi-weekly series with little serialized stories featuring 4. I think there were 4 features a comic.
Yeah. Cool.
And that was a series that I knew needed a lot of inventory. So I pitched an Iron Man story. In fact, I came up with the idea on a train ride with Dan Slott.
Wow.
I was with Dan Slott, and I was describing the idea to him, and he was shooting most of it down, and I just ignored him. Because both of us were beginners at the time. I don't think Dan had done too much yet either. And so, I just remember being on a train ride with him and talking the story over with him, and he kept shooting everything down. And I was like, eh. And I sold the story. And so my first published work was an Iron Man story. I think my second was a Nick Fury story, again in Marvel Comics Presents. And then I felt like, okay, I think I'm ready to start, pitching full issues. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the first full-length story that I wrote was an issue of the Silver Surfer, which was an inventory story. And then I got moved into the Spider-Man group as an assistant editor with me. Brevoort and I were moved into the Spider-Man group, and there was I think it was the 1994 Spider-Man holiday special. Okay. And again, they were looking for material. And I pitched a Spider-Man story, and that was the first Spider-Man story that I got to write, and it was illustrated by Kevin Maguire, who by that point was comic book superstar Kevin Maguire, because he had done that long run of Justice League, and he had done the Captain America, the Adventures of Captain America limited series with Fabian Nicieza. So he was already a big name. So to have a newcomer working with, a big name was great. But that's how it all began. I wanted to start off really slow because I didn't want anybody to get the impression that, oh, he's just here to get writing assignments, and then he's going to leave us. So, let's not, pay much attention to him.
Wow. Go ahead now.
So it's kind of funny, as a Hulk fan myself, I got into it and then I got out of it. And what got me back into it was the Rampaging Hulk series that you did. If you could tell me about that. I mean, I enjoyed it. Was there any grand story to that coming to be?
Well, this was late in the game. This was towards the end of my time at Marvel. And what had happened was we were going through a lot of different presidents. It seemed like every couple of weeks we'd have a new president. And there's this one particular guy came in and wanted to get us back on the newsstands because our presence on the newsstands had diminished really, really significantly over the years. And, the primary business was in comic book shops, stores that specifically sold comic books rather than newsstands. And he wanted to get us back. And he thought that we'd launch 2 new books that would be, written and produced expressly for the newsstand. Comic book stores could sell them too, but the idea was to get us onto the newsstands. One would be a Captain America book, and the other would be a Hulk book. And I lobbied hard to edit the Hulk book. I wanted it badly. And in fact, it got back to me that several people around the office went to the editor-in-chief and said, you really should give that book to Glenn to edit. And the editor-in-chief, in his infinite wisdom, gave it to a guy who knew nothing about the Hulk. How do I know this? Because the editor came to me and said, listen, Glenn, I know nothing about the Hulk. Can you help me? Can you help me on this? He said, I'm gonna be reaching out to different writers. Can you read their pitches and let me know if these pitches work? I said, sure, no problem. And I read a bunch of the pitches, and one was worse than the other. There was one in particular that I was tempted to just put it in my kitchen sink and burn it. I mean, that's how bad it was. So wrong-headed. And I said, I went back to this editor. I said, look, I read all these pitches. They're terrible. I said, they're just so wrong-headed. And he said, well, he looked at me with this blank look on his face, and he said, I'm supposed to we're going to press in 3 months. He said, we've got to get a team together. And I saw the fear in his eyes and the nervousness. And I said, look, I don't want to do this. I said, what if I wrote you a pitch? I said, I can have it for you tomorrow. I said, but if you're that much in a bind, I'll do it. I said, but I'm not lobbying to write this book. So he said, yeah, write something up. So I went home, I wrote up a pitch, turned it into him. And the next thing I knew, we were off and running. I figured out, there were some parameters. I went into it. I wanted to set it in the present day and basically be a second Hulk book to go alongside what Peter David was doing in his book, because my fear was that, well, if it's set in the past, nobody's going to be interested because there's no suspense, because nothing's going to happen to the main character. It's like the Superboy syndrome. It's like if you read stories about Superman when he was a kid, you don't have to worry about anything that's going to happen to him because he's going to grow up to be Superman. So I was lobbying to set it in the present day and just kind of riff off of what Peter was doing, and I was told no, it has to be set in the past because we want it to be the classic Hulk, the 1970s dumb Hulk. I said okay, fine. So I found an area of continuity that I could sort of squeeze into, and I wrote a pitch, presenting my thoughts on who the Hulk was as a character, where he was in terms of the canon, the continuity at that point, the status quo, and the kinds of stories I wanted to tell. And it got approved. and that's how it came together. I came up with the title, The Rampaging Hulk, as a tip of the hat to the last time the Hulk had more than one book, the magazine from the 70s.
The magazine.
And again, because it was set in the past, that book was set in the past also.
But Glenn, you also put your stamp on there because you're a co-creator of Ravage. And how awesome when Ravage appeared in that Hulk, that Destruction game. He was a character in the video game.
I heard about it after the fact. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, wait a second. You're a kid all the way back to watching the Lou Ferrigno stuff, loving this stuff, and now you have a stamp there and a character that is in continuity, was in a Hulk merchandise, that he's out there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sometimes I know maybe you don't take it like me, but I would have been that's crazy. I want to know what you think about that. I mean, you're a fan. I mean, you have a stamp there on the Hulk, man. That's with you till you die.
Well, I mean, I think that by that point, number one, I didn't find out about the Ravage thing until I think a couple of years later. So it was after the fact. I was kind of like, okay, where's my check?
Yeah.
I think if I'd gotten a check for it, I think I probably would have been more enthused. I think also if I'd had a better experience working on that Hulk book, I probably would be more enthused. I don't even count that book as part of the continuity. So, it was a very bittersweet experience because it should have been the best experience I ever had in comics. And it wasn't, for a variety of reasons. But yeah, I mean, I think if it had all happened like maybe like 2 or 3 years earlier, I would feel exactly the way you'd expect I'd feel.
Right. Go ahead, Steve. I know he's going to ask those questions. This leading right into that, Steve.
All right, so I'm going to go back a little bit further. You just mentioned that you got up to the point where you and Tom Brevoort had been moved over to the Spider-Man universe in 1994. Just to put it in context, realistically speaking, the industry had been going through this ridiculous, explosive, speculation era and sales era from, 1991, especially 1993. But in 1994, you were about to embark on one of the most controversial eras of Spider-Man in the history of the title. And I was very fortunate to be working behind the counter. And I remember when the clone stuff began to filter through, customers were coming up to me and saying, take me off my subscription list on everything. And at the time, I was like, why don't you guys slow down? Hold on. I said, this is a fascinating story right here. What are you doing? And they're like, that's not, they just said that this guy, the clone, was the real Spidey and la, 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 la. Okay. If that story happened today, I think it would be on CNN. I swear to you, there'd be riots. People wouldn't be able to take it. Even back then, it was an amazing era. Now, just to let you know personally, I loved the Clone Saga. I loved Ben Reilly. I loved all of it, okay? Because I don't like Peter Parker. I find him the most boring character in the world, okay? So I'm just tired of that constant whining and Aunt May and oh, woe to me. So as soon as Ben Reilly came along, I was like, okay, I'm interested in it still using the same rogues gallery.
Mm-hmm.
And plus, I also loved the Jackal and I loved all of that stuff. But I had to fight my heart out, to try and keep people on the book. What were your feelings and what was your level of Spider-Man knowledge when this stuff started to come down? And was it something that irked you, or was it something you were like, okay, I can see where they're going?
Okay. When I first heard about it, it was top secret. Nobody at the company outside of the Spider-Man group was supposed to know that this was happening. I wasn't in the Spider-Man group yet when it was starting, but I had a very good friend. He's still one of my closest friends. He was in the Spider-Man group at the time, and he and I were out to lunch or out for drinks or whatever one night, and it was just him and me, and he kind of took me into his confidence and said, this is what we're going to be doing. And I thought it was a terrible idea. I tried to talk him. I said, leave that storyline alone. I said that they did a whole thing just a few years earlier with, like, I think it was the Evolutionary War did a story about having to do with the clones and everything. And I said, leave that story dead. I mean, just leave, you know. And of course, they weren't going to listen to me, you know. But I was horrified. I thought it was a terrible idea. Fast forward a few months, and Marvel reorganizes, and now Brevoort and I are part of the Spider-Man group. We're not working on any of the main titles, but we're working on the ancillary stuff. But we're part of the group, and we're brought up to speed on what the ultimate plan was, and the plan was to replace Peter with Ben. And the creative team was very excited about it, all 4 writers and everything like that. And there was another shakeup, and the main editor of Spider-Man ended up leaving in the midst of all of this because he wasn't happy about the reorganization of the company, and Bob Budiansky was now the editor-in-chief of the Spider-Man group, and all this politics stuff. Anyway, so now Bob Budiansky is, you know, hands-on, knee-deep in all this Spider-Man stuff. And the issue where it's revealed that Ben is the real guy and Peter is the clone. I remember Bob signing off on the issue to send it out to press, you know, to get published. And I just got the feeling, and I don't want to speak for him, he could speak for himself, but I got the feeling, I think Tom Brevoort got the feeling that the minute he sent it out, he wanted to call it right back, make changes so that it never happened, because they were with us. The audience was with us throughout the whole clone saga thing, building up to that moment.
Yes.
And that was the moment where we lost them, you know, where we said,
gone. Oh,
we said, Peter's the clone, Ben's the real guy. And I think Bob knew that was going to happen, and he regretted signing off on that comic. Anyway, once Brevoort and I were, like, you know, getting deeper and deeper into the weeds, and we had to do, like, all the ancillary stuff, like Spider-Man: The Final Adventure, where we send Peter and Mary Jane off and set the stage for, now Ben is going to become Spider-Man instead of the Scarlet Spider. Now he's assuming the Spider-Man identity. So, you know, we kind of got handed, you know, a lemon, but we tried to make lemonade out of it. So we tried to be as helpful as we could. And I started to get to like Ben, and I saw a way that Ben could work as Spider-Man. I thought that absolutely what we needed to do, and what we needed to do right away, now that Peter has been shuffled off the stage, have Ben, you know, dye his hair brown again, shave, and adopt the Peter Parker identity, and just start anew. And, you know, if we're trying to attract new writers or lapsed writers or writers who, you know, haven't, you know, read the book in years, they come back, they pick up the comic book. As far as they know, it's Peter Parker, it's Spider-Man, you know? Yeah, we would have pissed off a lot of the fans who'd been with us all along, but I felt that we could overcome that as long as we didn't have a blonde guy named Ben Reilly walking around saying he's Spider-Man. And we just could never get to that point. We couldn't even get to that point to see if it would work. It just kept getting pushed back further and further and further. And it got to the point where by the time we did end the Clone Saga, I was so ready for it to be over. And I just wanted Ben to be gone, you know, and just get back to, I wanted him to be gone, and I wanted him to be forgotten, because I felt it was such an albatross on us. So I went from being opposed to it, to living with it, to just wishing it was done and forgotten.
Well, the funny thing is, Glenn, is in 2001, I was working for myself. I had a little company called Houston's Comic Service. And I had gone around buying every single clone issue that there ever was for months and for years. And then on eBay, I began to sell sets of the entire story. Mm-hmm. I can't tell you how much money I made off of that, because what happened was that at first people were like, I'm stopping, I'm done. Well, you know how Marvel is. They have this way of dragging you back.
Mhm.
And suddenly, all these people are like, I've got this gap in my collection now. And not just Amazing, of course, because it ran through Amazing, Web Spectacular, and then also like Spider-Man, all sorts of stuff. And also the ancillary titles, all sorts of things. And I remember I sold 2 sets at the time. I sold the Maximum Carnage and I sold the Clone Saga. And it just sold and sold and sold. And the funny thing is that as the years have passed, and people come up to me, and they're like, hey, Steve, I love Ben Reilly. And I'm like, I like Ben Reilly too. And they're like, what? And I'm like, I love Ben Reilly too, because, but in hindsight, everything you said about people being pissed off is 100% correct. Because if you had come up, and they did this, by the way, about 5 or 6 years ago, they came along and replaced the Hulk with
Amadeus Cho.
Yes. And I was like, wait a minute, we have like an Asian Hulk now completely changed around. And I was like, wait a minute, I've been reading the Hulk for 100 years. So suddenly I was like, no, those Spider-Man fans, I get it. The anger and the pain.
Yep.
So again, you're right. And the impact of that issue when it was revealed that Ben was the original. Oh, if that happened today, I would imagine there'd be riots outside the Marvel offices. Everyone would be canceled. Everyone would have been labeled something. It would have been a complete and utter disaster. But it's a fascinating era to look back on now. And believe you me, and you may not know this, John, but Ben Reilly has been very active in the modern Marvel universe for a long time now and is not going anywhere. Kane isn't going anywhere. None of that stuff's going anywhere. So unfortunately, you have to open up your Deep Coast Spider-Mans and read those back issues while everyone else continues on.
Well, I mean, I would say, I actually got some great creative opportunities because of the Clone Saga. My first Spider-Man story was a Ben Reilly story. It was about Ben Reilly's first Christmas back in New York since going off into exile, and he's Spider-Man again by that point. Peter and Mary Jane had left. He's Spider-Man, and it's his first Christmas back in New York. So I did that. When we decided that we had to reverse course and restore Peter, and we were going to bring back, this was another decision that I disagreed with, but we had to live with it, which was that Norman Osborn was behind it all. It was left to me to figure out how to make that work. How is Norman Osborn alive? And so I sat down and created a whole timeline and figured all the details out, and that became the basis for Peter Parker Spider-Man number 75, which wrapped up the Clone Saga. And of course, I turned all of that into the one shot that I wrote, Spider-Man the Osborn Journal, which explained the entire Clone Saga from Norman Osborn's point of view, explaining how he set the whole thing in motion. So for me, I got a lot of work out. I got a lot of work out of that. I certainly earned my pay. Yes. And so in that regard, it was very good for me, even though creatively speaking, I didn't agree with a lot of the decisions that were made. First and foremost, that the Clone Saga even happened, but second, that Norman Osborn be behind it, and that's a whole other conversation. But it's worked out well. I mean, Norman's he's been back probably longer than he was dead at this point.
Well, okay. So first off, Steve, I don't know if we're blood brothers anymore. Maybe we're just going to have to go our separate ways and accept how the fates have turned that out, because I can't agree with you for 1 second what you just said there. I want to Conan that I don't know what to say right now. It's like I found you cheating on me, and I just walked in the room.
He's going to go take a shower after this.
Yeah, let it happen. Let it happen. But Glenn, okay, now turbulent times are coming with the whole Marvel stuff and all that. You're kind of right in the middle of all this. So, and then you kind of venture out of there and start doing some other stuff. Talk about those times, about as well as you can, without mentioning names and all that stuff, just like what was going on when all of a sudden the walls start shaking and the foundations of the Marvel universe are not as strong as they used to be because there's the Kree Skrull war is happening. It is happening.
Right. The editors knew, especially the above my level. I was still an assistant editor when the cracks started to form. So I was still very naive, wet behind the ears, not as knowledgeable. But the more senior editors knew that the minute that Marvel bought its own distributor, Heroes World, that this was going to gut the industry. And they were saying it. They said this is just going to destroy the industry. And they proved to be right. I don't know if anybody passed that word on to the executives who were making these decisions. If they did, it fell on deaf ears because they did it anyway, and it turned out it was right. Marvel buying its own distributor just was like knocked the dominoes down one by one. And it happened pretty rapidly. Once the layoffs started happening, and it happened every time the same year, right after Christmas vacation, 2 years in a row. And the company got smaller and smaller, and morale just went down the tubes. You'd go in every day wondering, is this it? Is this the day I'm going to get fired? Is this the day I'm going to get laid off? We went into bankruptcy. We all thought that was going to be the end. And finally, by the time Marvel was merged with Toy Biz, there were rumors. This was like in August of '98.
Yeah.
The merger had just happened, and right away
that's with Avi Arad, right? Avi Arad was the one that owned the Toy Biz.
Isaac Perlmutter and Avi Arad.
Avi Arad, yeah.
And that merger happened, and right away, there were rumors that they were going to cut the staff down again. So at that point, I'd had enough. I wasn't happy at the company anymore anyway, for a variety of reasons. And so I decided it was my time to leave. And so I had branched out, excuse me, and a lot of Marvel people who had left, who had been laid off in the previous couple of years, a lot of them ended up at Scholastic, the educational publishing company. Yeah. And so one of them being Bob Budiansky, who put in a good word for me with the editor-in-chief who ended up hiring me. And so I had an offer at Scholastic, and I took it. And the timing couldn't have been more perfect, because the day that I went in to give notice, they laid off my entire editorial level, the associate editor level. So I was leaving anyway. So I was kind of like, water off my back. I was like, yeah, I was coming in to quit anyway. So what happened was, using my editorial experience at Marvel and my book editorial experience from my job before Marvel, plus the fact that I worked for the college newspaper for about 3 years, ultimately rising to the position of editor-in-chief. So I had a journalism background. So at Scholastic, I basically became a journalist for kids. I was the editor of Scholastic News. Which, if you have kids, and you probably your kids are probably familiar with that magazine. And so I really honed my craft as a journalist, and I did that for many, many years until I left Scholastic and went over to the competition, which was Time Magazine for kids, which was literally Time Magazine, but for kids. And so I did that for a bunch of years. And through the connections that I made there, I ended up doing work for some of their brands, some of the Time Inc. brands, Entertainment Weekly, People. And ultimately, if you've seen these bookazines that are out there, they're called bookazines, but they're published by Time, Entertainment Weekly, People, other companies. They're like 100-page hard stock cover magazines all about a single topic. So you'll see them on the stands. They'll be like, if it's an anniversary of Jimi Hendrix's death or something, there'll be like a Jimi Hendrix thing, or if somebody just died, when I'm sure you'll see something about David Crosby very soon, or Jeff Beck. So I've been doing a lot of those. I've also branched out into fiction writing. I've written for Star Trek, for Simon and Schuster. I wrote prose Star Trek fiction. I've written X-Files, X-Files prose fiction. So a little bit of everything.
Wow.
Put that hand down now. I saw that. But one more thing, though, what was pretty cool, though, is that, I saw that you did you were doing the Time magazine stuff, that, the Spider-Man. It's great to know that, because, sometimes when I'll show one to Roy, and when he sees a mistake, it's like, oh, my God.
I'm the same way. Oh,
God. And so when you have somebody at your caliber that knows these characters that are doing that, it's very refreshing when you see that, because usually when you get those magazines, it's always Stan Lee and that's it. Nobody knows anything else. But that's a testament to how good you do that stuff. And you've been doing a few of those recently, though. But go ahead, Steve. Go ahead.
So obviously, I don't know how much room you have in your head for all those different universes. Obviously, to be able to write something that keeps fans happy from both the X-Files universe, which is, very complex. And I mean, I wasn't aware of your Star Trek, but what era of Star Trek were you working with?
Well, in the comic books, for Marvel, I did the original series after Star Trek: The Motion Picture. So I planted seeds for the Wrath of Khan. So that was in the comics. Okay. For the prose fiction, I did stuff that was set in the time frame of the Next Generation, but it was with.
I think if we're talking about this, you might as well be on the bridge of the Enterprise, right?
Well, thank you. I actually just was on the bridge a couple of months ago. I was on that reconstructed set in Ticonderoga, New York. You know about that?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh my God! I sat down in the captain's chair and I was like, "This is the most comfortable chair I have ever sat in. I don't ever want to get out of this chair." But anyway, the prose fiction was set in the Next Generation time frame, but it was on an original ship that was exclusive to the fiction, so that we could do whatever we want with the characters. So we weren't confined to, Captain Picard had to be here and done this and that. It was more of a blank slate kind of crew. So I did 2 of those, and so they were set in the Next Generation time frame. And in the first book, I guest starred the Next Generation cast. So it was my chance to write Picard, Riker. I think Data may have shown up, or Worf. I know Picard for sure. Picard had a big role in my first one. And in the second one, I used Scotty, because we know from the Next Generation that Scotty lived on to the 24th century.
One of my favorite episodes of all time.
Yeah. Yeah. So I brought him in as a guest star. So I did those 2. And the X-Files, the way I got around all that heavy mythology is I just did I did a Monster of the Week story. So I didn't have to deal with the conspiracy stuff. Yeah.
Was Star Trek something you always wanted to do?
I'm sorry?
Was Star Trek were you always like, I want to do Star Trek books?
Oh yeah, for sure. There was a novel that came out in 1983 called Yesterday's Sun. And I bought it the day I found it in the bookstore. It was a brand new release, and I bought it in the bookstore, and I brought it home, and I started reading it when I got home, and I finished it the next morning, and I stayed up all night to read it. That's how much I love this book. And that not only made me want to become a writer, it made me want to write Star Trek. And I had pitched story ideas to DC when DC got the license. And I was in college. I might have been in high school or college. And I was pitching ideas to Bob Greenberger, who was the editor of the Star Trek comics at DC. And, rejection after rejection, but he was very encouraging. And I was like, this is what I really, really want to do this. Then I ended up at Marvel, and I figured, well, that dream is dead because, Marvel doesn't publish Star Trek and DC does. And then Marvel got the rights to the Star Trek comics.
Yeah.
So it all worked out. And it was something that Star Trek is something that I'd wanted to do since I was about 12 or 13.
Wow.
And so that was another dream come true. And that, unlike my experience writing the Hulk, that was everything I wanted it to be, that experience.
Oh, that's good.
Mhm.
The best times I had writing the Hulk was when he guest starred. I did an issue of the Silver Surfer where he guest starred, and I had a blast writing him in that story. And I did a retelling of his origin for a comic book called Uncanny Origins, and that was a lot of fun too. Yeah, but working on Rampaging was not the experience that I was hoping it would be, but Star Trek was.
Glenn, I thought you were going to say your best time writing the Hulk was when you were 8 years old. On your, you had creative control.
Look at that cast he had. Batman and Superman.
I know.
He had creative control, man.
Yeah.
Glenn,
Well,
I have a question for you, because as you know, Roy watches this and he always critiques and he tells me what I did wrong or said wrong or this guy and all that. And so say hi to Roy right now, because he's going to be watching. But he wanted me to, he wanted me to ask you this question. 1991, Dracula with him and Dick Giordano. Giordano. Yeah, he talked to me about that, because Roy wants to hear your side of it. He from his perspective of like when they were trying to do that finish that adaptation of Dracula that they did.
My recollection is that this was around 97, 98.
Yeah.
And at that point I was editing my own titles at Marvel. And Roy and Dick Giordano were meeting with Marvel's publisher at the time, a guy named Cheryl Rhodes. They had pitched the idea of going back and finishing the adaptation of the novel Dracula that they had started in the early 70s. And it was running in the Dracula Lives black and white magazine. And Dracula Lives got canceled, so they picked it up again in a magazine called the Legion of Monsters #1.
Yes.
And I think that got canceled after the first issue. And then that was it. They just, I think they got like maybe the first third of the book adapted, the novel adapted. And so they wanted to finish it. And if Marvel wasn't interested, I think that what Roy and Dick wanted to do was lease the pages that had already been published and take it to another publisher.
Correct.
If I remember correctly, Roy had approached Ralph Macchio, editor Ralph Macchio, about being involved in this. And I think at that point, Ralph was too busy. So Ralph, knowing of my love for Dracula, in fact, around that same time, I was writing Dracula for Marvel. I did a Dracula limited series, which was one of the other best experiences I ever had in comics. But anyway, Ralph recommended that Roy, Dick, and Cheryl bring me into this. And I was like, hell yeah. So I met with Roy and Dick and Cheryl, and we talked about it. And Cheryl was interested in doing it. I was interested, and I said, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to order all of the film from the chapters that had already been published by that Roy and Dick had done. I'll get all the film for all of those pages. I'll sort through what we've got. We'll try to, find some of the original artwork, as much of that as possible, so it'll really print nicely. Because when you're shooting off a film, it's kind of like looking at a Xerox of a Xerox.
Yeah.
So I said, and I knew that probably some of the pages were missing from the warehouse. So I started this whole journey, and I ordered everything that the warehouse had. Send it over to me. And I was talking to Roy, I was talking to Dick, and we were going to do it. I had all of the film in my flat files in my office. And right around the time that I would have really started diving into it and devoting, 90% of my attention to it, is when I had to leave the company, because there were going to be layoffs. And if I like I said, The day I went in to quit, I got laid off. So that was one of the projects that unfortunately I would have had to walk away from. But I don't remember if I sat somebody down and said, here's where I am with this project. But all the film was there. And what I found out a few years later was, I think it was Mark Beasley at that point was at Marvel, and he was doing this project. And I think I reached out to him, maybe through Ralph or maybe directly. And I said, I had all the film. Are you using any of it? And he said, you did? He says, you were going to be doing this? I said, yeah. I said, I did all the preliminary work. He goes, I had no idea. So he had to start from scratch and just basically as if none of the legwork had already been done. So I felt bad for him, but he ended up doing a great job. But that's about as far as I'd gotten. I'd gotten all the film. I was going to start working with Dick in specifically working with Dick to see what original pages he either still had or he could get his hands on.
Right. Wow.
And with Roy, I just would have, because it was more important to get the art at that point, just to figure out what we had and what we couldn't get. And then at that point, once we were up and running, I would have spoken to Roy and tried to give him as many pages as he would have wanted. I know that Roy had to trim the new stuff. I think he had to trim like 20 pages or so out of the plot that he wanted to wrap up the book with. I would have tried to fight for him to get as much of those pages in as possible. I know he felt like the conclusion of the book kind of got the short end of the stick. I would have tried to, I would have at least fought to get him the pages that he felt he needed.
Wow. Oh, cool. Okay, Steve, go ahead.
So now the question is, what are you working on right now? What's exciting you? What's coming down the pipeline?
Okay. Well, I'm in marketing. That's the
this is it right here.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So there it is.
I have a copy. I definitely have my copy. I was very happy to see it done. I wish I could have done it. But I was very happy to see it done. And it broke my heart. It broke my heart when Roy wrote about it in Alter Ego, and he referred to me as an editor whose name I can no longer remember. And I wrote to him and I said, Roy, you're killing me. And he apologized. And I guess he remembers now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He says you're a great guy. So just so you know that. All right, Steve, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I feel likewise. What I'm doing now is I'm in marketing. I'm in marketing copywriting, which I've been doing for the past 5 years now. So I've been doing marketing copywriting for an educational publishing company named Benchmark Education. And we publish fantastic stuff for literacy materials to help kids accelerate in learning how to read and literacy, whether from kindergarten to 6th grade and beyond. And so I do that's my main focus. But when I have the time for spare time, I still do these bookazines that I've been talking about. I did for Time Magazine. I did one for about I did Spider-Man, which you mentioned, John, which you're mentioned in. And
thank you very much.
Thank you. You're welcome. And I do try to put. My desire and my goal is to not make it one of those run-of-the-mill things where Stan Lee did everything, right, and he had these artists working for him and all of that. No, my desire is to tell the whole story and to defy expectations. And so I did one about Stan Lee just recently, Stan Lee and the origins of the Marvel Universe. And I was somebody warned me that there was a lot of talk online that this was going to be just another kiss up to Stan, and that Jack Kirby was going to be, given the short end of the stick, and Steve Ditko. Well, no, I went in and fought for them to get all of their due credit that they deserve, and to paint a more accurate picture of what was going on at Marvel at the time. Anyway, But I don't just do comics. I don't just do comic related stuff. I've done 3 bookazines that were related to another passion of mine, the Beatles. I did one about John Lennon. I did one for Time about Paul McCartney. I did a Beatles trivia book. I'm working on another Beatles project right now that's probably a little too early to talk about. And I just completed another comic book related one that's a biggie that I'll be talking about very soon. I'll start promoting that as soon as I get the green light. But that's another comic book related one, sort of in the same vein as the Spider-Man one, where it's exclusive about one particular character, the history, the impact, the pop culture, stature, all that kind of stuff. Very, very happy with the way it turned out. But I've done one about Raiders of the Lost Ark. I've done one about Star Trek. I've done one about Star Wars. And they're like, these little capsule histories. And I've been able to incorporate interviews with people that I've spoken to over the years that were directly involved with some of these franchises. So for like Spider-Man, I interviewed all of the key writers who worked on the comics since 1960. I guess since Jerry Conway. Stan had already passed, but I used an archival interview that I did with Stan 10, 15 years ago. For Star Trek, I interviewed George Takei and Gary Lockwood, who played Gary Mitchell in the second pilot. For Star Wars, I used an interview that I did with Mark Hamill a couple of years earlier. So, and for the next one, I did like 10 interviews. It's been a blast. I feel like a real journalist.
That's awesome.
Okay, and so in wrapping this all up, I want to have, we kept your time, and Glenn, we're definitely going to want you back because you got a lot more stuff, and
I'm happy
you're a fanboy, man. You can come in through the other side. We'll do some top 10 lists and stuff with you. So now, what do you have the last thing to say with Mr. Greenberg?
I mean, I've read your Star Trek books, the comic books and stuff you did. I mean, is there anything down the road? Would you ever want to get back into doing maybe some more of your own, any projects with comics or anything?
Absolutely. I mean, I love the medium. I love the medium of comics. I love the process. And so, absolutely. I think it's the industry is a very strange place right now, and this is gonna sound really arrogant, and I don't mean for it to. I'm just calling it as I see it. I see how the books are being written these days. I see how the books are being drawn these days, and I think I have a lot to offer the industry. I think the industry needs people like me. And people who share my sensibilities, because I see them catering to an ever shrinking audience.
Yes.
And I think that with my real world experience, having been out there, I mean, I went from Marvel to Scholastic. And what I kept trying to tell people at DC and Marvel is I'm now writing and editing directly for the audience that you guys want and can't seem to get. So, why don't you sort of listen to me? I said, let's talk. Let's maybe I can come back in some kind of capacity because I know how to reach the audience that you want to reach, which is kids. You should be reaching kids because where else is the next generation of comic book readers going to come from? And they didn't want to hear it. And that's just not me casting aspersions. That's me stating a fact. And I won't name names, but I was explaining to one high-ranking executive at one of the big two everything I just told you, and all this particular exec could do is just kind of blurt out like very defensive things like, oh well, we do this and we do this, and I said, it's not working. I said, it's not working. I said, we've gone from selling millions to selling, to crowing about selling 40,000. I said, that's not the right trajectory we should be going in. And they just didn't want to hear it. And if I mention the names, you probably wouldn't be surprised. But I guess
I probably talked to him too. Glenn. I talked to a lot of those guys.
Yeah,
I talked to him too. So,
but I think as much as I would be happy to come back, I don't think they want me. I think age has something to do with it. I'm not in my 20s anymore. And so, but my argument would be is that You know, I think that just from the fact that I understand the craftsmanship of how to write a comic book, and a lot of writers these days don't seem to.
Yeah?
I think
No,
they
you
could
think?
use me.
Oh, yeah. You think? Go ahead, Steve, wrapping this up.
Okay, that last little segment right there, Glenn, is a beautiful thing to hear. I agree with you 100%. On this channel, we try not to be too negative, but if we wanted to, and also there is a lot of great stuff here on the Pop XP where they get into the real weeds of what's going on right now.
Mm-hmm.
But if I heard that you were going back to Marvel in any way and doing some work, I would be one of the people that would be cracking open that champagne because any of that crap that comes down the pipeline right now, you would see it for what it is, and you would say, no. What are you talking about? Who are you? And that person would say, do you realize that I used to work in Starbucks and I was a barista? Yes, but you don't know anything about the characters you're writing about right now. But I'm friends with such and such.
Mm-hmm.
You need to get out of this office right now. Stuff like that is very important. And the sequence that I hope people, when they watch this, about appealing to the smaller and smaller demographic as the month goes on, it makes no fiscal sense. Now, obviously, Marvel is owned by a huge corporate structure, and that corporate structure has a certain ideology right now. And they are willing to somehow survive with each title only having a print run of 10,000 just so they can get a message out.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what it's going to take. I don't know what it's going to take to break the camel's back. I don't know what it is. But again, another thing that you said, the ageism. Now, look at you. You're young, okay? You got a long time to go. You got a force of power, imagination. You could get in there and you could work in there, and people, and you could correct these 20-year-olds, 19-year-olds, and say, no, the Hulk doesn't do that. What are you doing? Okay, no, Captain America doesn't wear that. He can't fly. Please, So again, I really appreciate. Especially that last little segment. I think you're gonna, in unison, we agree with you 100%. And I, for one, would be cheering if someone of your quality and knowledge could get in there and clean some house and maybe stop some of that, stop some of the gumph that's happening. I just don't know what it's going to take for some shuffling around and from logical reason to take prey. I don't know what that's going to take. But thank you.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Thank you.
In ending, Glenn, I want to say that, another thing I like about you is that you see on Facebook and stuff, and I always read like your reviews on like the movies or the stuff. And I'm going to tell you guys and everybody out there, you should read it because he gives his honest review. It isn't sucking up. He legit, and this is why I wanted you on here, Glenn, and why I like you. It wasn't just the Hulk, wasn't just when I saw that, I was like, good. He's actually telling it like it is. He's not worried about the pitchforks and all that stuff. And you give an honest, accurate, and very intelligent summary of all the stuff that go. And when it's good, it's good. When it's bad, it's bad. And you call out on that. And I got to admit, Glenn, I respect you for that. And I like that you do. And I'll tell you something. I talked to Roy about this, and I talked to him about some of the guys I like, some of the guys that I know just talk this. Believe me. But I tell him, and about you, and I said, Glenn is one of a small group out there that on those big social media platforms, he'll tell it like it is, and you can destroy something, but do it intelligently the way you do it. But people are so afraid to do that. Think about this. I'm telling you that, and how radical that is today. That's nuts. That's crazy. And when I read your stuff, it's well. So in closing, and I'll give you the last word, Glenn. Obviously, it's like I thank you for that, and you're a fan, and I love you for that. And I just so you know, it's appreciated over here. And I know me, Steve, and Niall, and Billy Tucci in the background, and Roy appreciate that. So go ahead, Glenn.
Well, thank you, but everything you just said may well be the reason why the comic book industry isn't calling me to come back.
Of course, I know that's why. I know that's why.
Yeah.
But I know that's why. But Glenn, like I said, it's an honor to have you. It's a pleasure, and we're definitely going to want you back. And
I'll have. Yeah,
thanks for being out there, and thanks for being one of those guys in the same vein of like the Roy Thomas, like a fanboy first that ushered in and made it to the top, and putting his thumb mark on a character, whether you like it or not. You didn't know. You got a piece of the Hulk in there. I mean, like that, knowing that you were that kid drawing those comics and you got a piece. I mean, that's what we all strive for, and that's going to live, and that's out there. So it's a pleasure to have you, and thank you very much. And we got more coming up in the future. We got more episodes going live soon and everything. So join us. Steve, get us out of here with Mighty Mystic Mjolnir.
Boom!
Boom!
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us on Pop XP. If you haven't already, make sure to click that subscribe button and also click the bell for notifications when we go live and we upload some awesome new content. Also, don't forget to head on over to Twitter and follow us at the Pop XP and over on Instagram at the Pop XP. Thanks again everyone, and we'll see you soon.